So this is Still and More, and Nima Majur of I Read It TV. We're back, baby. We're doing it live. And what is today, Nima? It's the day before Thanksgiving. It's 11/22/23, November 22nd, 2023. And we have something to be celebratory about. Maybe. Something to be thankful for. Maybe. Javier Milei was just elected president in Argentina. Are you excited, Nima?
I think if you read through his positions, it reads like a dream, like a libertarian wet dream. Except for the financial aspect, which we'll get into.
Which is the aspect we want to focus on today, yes.
But yeah, I would also like to, I would like to talk about some of the good positions that he has, because it's actually kind of funny, some of it.
Right.
Go
ahead.
I don't think a lot of people are going to level this criticism that we have against him, because if anything, the only criticism that we hear is, he was on a WEF panel, and he supported Israel, and oh my God, he has two viewpoints. Or
he's a Nazi, right? He's a crazy Nazi far right extremist, right?
Yes, that's the completely retarded side of things. Of course, the Trump framing that they're doing with him. But there's also the people on the right, libertarians, who write him off because he was at the WEF a couple of times or once or whatever, and he supported Israel, and so he has the wrong opinions on those two things. So he's a shill.
There we go. That's how reality works. But to Niba's point, yes, we're going to be leveling a criticism that I think. It's not unique, because we know at least Mike Norman is leveling a similar criticism, right? But it might be the first time you've heard it, because so Javier comes out and he's got this stuff, these ideas of like, we'll just get rid of all of these federal agencies, which is the libertarian wet dream that you're talking about, right? And as we've discussed on the show, I don't know if it's ad nauseum yet, but we do intend on making it ad nauseum as we go forward into the future, is that we like where the libertarians start. They trip over themselves once they leave like first principles and enter the realm of economics, and then they just don't stop tripping over themselves as they move forward. So what we're worried about here is, like, I mean, for example, I don't know if you got the video handy, Nima, of where he's like ripping all the the federal ministries off the wall. Like the Ministry of Education, we're getting rid of it. The Ministry of Transportation, we're getting rid of it. The Ministry of Tourism, getting rid of it. And he's got 50 of these things on the wall, and he's sitting there ripping them off one by one. So on one hand, I agree. Probably two things. Probably those federal agencies aren't doing anything. And I looked up the corruption index for Argentina before we got on the show. Now, I don't know how objective a corruption index is, but the corruption indices seem to indicate that Argentina is on a similar level as Morocco, which is not the most trustworthy society that you could find yourself in. And it's my understanding that when it comes to, I don't know if Argentina's third world, but we'll say it for the sake of argument, for the outside the West. Inside the West, when people go into public service, there's this idea that, okay, yeah, there might be some corruption, but you're not supposed to be doing corruption, and you're there to actually serve the community. And most of the rest of the world, when you get involved in public service, that is an opportunity to personally enrich yourself. So for all these public institutions that Javier's talking about getting rid of, I think on the corruption level, like the Ministry of Education, I bet it's not giving anybody any education. The Ministry of Tourism, I bet it's not helping with tourism. The Ministry of Transportation, I bet it's not helping. Like, I bet all these things are just completely corrupt, gobbling up government contracts and giving nothing to the people. I don't want to say there's no question in my mind, but I would say I bet there's a high probability that that's the case. But if you've listened to the show at all, you have an understanding of MMT, and you have an understanding of how government spending works and how the economy works based on the government spending. You know that the federal government, the creator of the currency, has to inject money into the system for the system to work. Now, let's say that all these federal agencies are corrupt and they don't do anything that they're supposed to. The fact that they are still introducing money into the system is still helping the system to work. I mean, I guess this is something like saying, okay, the only way I could get food is when somebody comes and busts down my door and punches me in the face and leaves food on my kitchen table and runs out. Like, if that's the only way for me to get food, that's a very terrible way for me to get food. But if that guy stops, I starve.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that is.
Go ahead, Nima.
Yeah, that is the big wild card with the guy. Are they going to? Are they setting a trap for libertarians here? I guess is the big question. I guess, but do you want to just go through his political positions?
Well, before we go through the political positions, in case someone's listening to this for the first time and what I just said sounds completely anathema, Nima, do you want to give like just a brief synopsis of, okay, here's the MMT standpoint of you have to have government spending for the private sector to even be able to operate, and by restricting it, you destroy the economy.
Yeah, any monetary system is based on and has historically have always been based on a government imposing a tax, which means that people need that money, and then the government spending money into that economy so people can pay their taxes and also save some of it for themselves and invest, etc., etc. So, historically, something like 7 out of 7 depressions in this country have been preceded by the attempts of balancing the budget. And so that's something that he wants to do as well. He basically wants to implement IMF policies, but 10 times over that, without the IMF even having to do anything. Mm-hmm. And so that generally, historically, has always meant austerity for the people. And that will be a surefire way to make him very unpopular and to make the whole ideology that he now represents on the world stage look very disastrous, for decades to come. That is the one fear that I have with this guy. Yeah,
and I share that fear. Absolutely. And if, he's also talking about getting rid of the central bank. And I mean, we've talked about this show as well, like what central banks actually do. It's not what the, people fighting against Team Illuminati Overlord typically think they do. Now, we're not saying that they don't have power and there aren't vested interests controlling from a small group of networked people and whatever. But the idea that these central banks are... Yeah. And I mean, I don't know the details in Argentina, but the idea that these central banks are just like these private banks that, print the nation's money supply and then they collect interest and we're owned by international bankers and then we suck everything up out of the people. It doesn't exactly work that way. These are usually hand in hand with the government, and Argentina is going to be a different story because they're so in debt in dollars, which we're going to have to talk about at some point. But at least for the United States, the Federal Reserve is federal. It's just part of the money creation process that we have, both via the federal government and via the banking system. And if you're going to cut that out without really understanding what it does, and you don't have a backup plan, I'm worried. I mean, I don't know if he has the authority to just get rid of the central bank, but
right. So that is the overarching question. Yeah, that's the big question. All of this: how much power does the Argentinian president actually have? I honestly don't really know. I took a quick look at the distribution of representatives in their legislature, and so there's lots of blue here, which is the center left party, and then there's this yellow, which is I don't know, centrist big tent. I don't know. So either way, he's not working with a Congress full of anarcho-capitalists, basically, right? So there's no idea of, okay, I'm going to get rid of this department, that department. Okay, do you actually have that power? I don't know. I highly doubt that is the case. So that's a big question. Does he actually have the power to do all those things? I think a reasonable assumption would be to say no. And it's much more likely he's going to have to work with a whole bunch of representatives, bureaucrats of all kinds of political ideologies. So I guess the question becomes, what can he do? And is there a danger that whatever he does do is disastrous for the country and disastrous for the people, and not just disastrous in a way where, oh, this policy created some problems down the road, but if you're gonna, let's say, for example, if you're gonna cut the deficit more than the IMF ones, that's why I wanted to go through his positions, because these are some of the things.
Let's just do that then.
Okay, so should we start with the good or the bad?
I think, can you zoom in a little bit?
Sure.
One more. Give me one more. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so many media outlets have referred to him as far right, it says here, ultra-conservative, right-wing populist, right libertarian, right? So that's basically kind of meaningless, honestly.
Right. He's ultra-conservative and extreme libertarian. Which one is it? Yes.
This is what the corporate media has done now. It's just libertarian equals right wing, and not just right wing, but ultra right. So, I guess it's a matter of framing your political enemies. We have a comment from Anatoly. I hope you guys discuss some of his economic ideas. Some of them sound flawed from my MMT understanding, but I defer to you guys. Or just this WEF status, also good. Yeah, we already started talking about those things. Oh, by the way, David replied to us, I'm on a shortened schedule this week because of the holiday, so I'm rushing in to finish my columns. But I'd love to come on again with you guys on any upcoming day if you're choosing. So, all right. The infamous David Cole will be joining us soon, one of these days. So there's just some inside baseball. But anyway, economically, they've described his position as ultra-liberal. Okay, so as an American, right, this sounds weird, right? Is it liberal? Is it like,
and then we are reading Wikipedia here. This is everybody, every editor jizzing all over this thing because it's the hot topic right now, right?
And Milei primarily identifies as a minarchist, libertarian, or classical liberal. So that's very clear, right? That is libertarian, essentially, you could say. Sure. While also aligning theoretically with anarcho-capitalism and paleo-libertarianism. I guess paleo-libertarianism may be something between paleo-conservatism and...
Yeah, that's the first time I've heard that term.
Yeah. It's a libertarian activism strategy aimed at uniting libertarians and paleo-conservatives. Okay, whatever. But anarcho-capitalism, I mean, this is... interesting because there haven't been a lot of world leaders recently or ever that I'm aware of who actually align with anarcho-capitalism.
Yeah, this is pretty bizarre. I mean, we could at least give it that credit.
Right. So it is interesting. It is unprecedented, I would say. And one caveat, though, also, the anarcho-capitalists and libertarians, they always think that they're idea and their ideology is totally fringe, but it's actually really a pretty popular wing of the long-term revolutionary movement. Since the late 1800s, you've had the radical communists, you've had the libertarians, and you've had the monarchists or traditionalists nowadays, right? Mm-hmm. Actually, sorry, the three wings of the revolution: nationalism, libertarianism, and communism/socialism. And for example, people like David Rockefeller has written in his memoirs about he studied under Hayek, and how much he appreciates his teachings and all that. So I just want to point out that this idea is not necessarily all that fringe, and not as fringe as many of its adherents think. Mm-hmm. He advocates for a minimalistic government focused solely on justice and security. That's great. You see a lot of things as we go through here. His ideas, they sound very good, in my opinion. Milei's philosophical underpinnings incorporate principles of life, liberty, and property. Right, that was the original rallying cry of the revolutionaries in the United States, except they turned it ultimately into life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But this was also a popular rallying cry at that same time back then, as well as the tenets of non-aggression, self-ownership, and free market fundamentals. In addition to Milei's political philosophy, believes the state is the enemy of wealth and that Keynesian economics is evil. He's in strong opposition to socialism and communism. Great. Yep. Criticizing this violent systems that generate misery and hunger. Yeah, duh. Milei also takes a critical stance on Argentina's central bank. We just discussed that. Taxation policies. Proposing radical changes aimed at economic liberalization and restructuring of government ministries.
Okay, so I mean, so far the only big red flag, has been the economic stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when it gets into the economic views here, we should jump into this right away. Yeah.
Outspoken advocate for economic liberalism, fiscal conservatism, so subscribing to the Austrian school of economic thought and taking a critical stance against Keynesian economics. Okay. So once again, I mean, this is like for Austrians, libertarians, this is like a wet dream. Like I said, it's like, oh my God, we have our guy in there now, right? He draws his economic philosophy from a wide array of thinkers and economists, spanning from classical figures like Adam Smith to modern theorists like Murray Rothbard, Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, Gary Becker, and Jesus Huerta de Soto. I mean, this is stuff like Murray Rothbard has been pretty foundational in my getting into Austrian economics, so to all the people who are into that, this is very exciting. And then this De Soto guy, I actually have a book of his which I never read, but and then obviously Hayek and all these. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty exciting. Milei has expressed particular admiration for the economic policy of former Argentinian president. So this is some boring stuff here.
So before you move on, I do want to start the commentary here. Oop, I'm bumping my camera with my foot. So we've been critical of Austrian economics on the show, and we do it both as former adherents to Austrian economics. And as far as I've been able to tell, I used to say there was one core issue, but now I think there are two. I think there are two core issues with Austrian economics that are also core issues with actually neoclassical economics as well, that completely and utterly create an economic system that has nothing to do with reality. And the two issues are acceptance of the barter theory of money, and one that I've more recently believe is a core issue is this concept of equilibrium within the economy. And the concept of equilibrium is kind of the foundational point that's used for coming up with the barter theory of money to begin with. And we've talked about this when it comes to Professor Richard Werner, and he's got this article, and some point I want to just go over this article, just rips the equilibrium theory apart. And the equilibrium theory is really basic. It essentially says...
We went through that article, didn't we?
I don't know if we went through it line by line. Or point by point, I should say.
Yeah, pretty much, I think so. Okay. Close to it.
But just to go over it quickly here, the equilibrium idea is that if you've got a supply and demand curve, your supply is this and your demand is that, based on those 2 points, you're going to find an equilibrium point in the middle. And there's no evidence of that being true at all. And that's like one of the fundamental tenets of economics. There's no evidence that says like, okay, based on the supply and the demand, there's going to be an equilibrium that happens here because we're all made up of rational actors that base our economic decisions on X, Y, and Z. Well, it turns out we don't actually base our economic decisions on X, Y, and Z. There is no equilibrium, and it's not in balance. Right? And the barter theory of money essentially says, well, because of this equilibrium idea, people originally based their economies on barter, which we've gone over. There's no evidence of that being the case. And at some point, there's one thing that gets bartered more than everything else, and because of this action of equilibrium, or used by the regression theorem from who came up with the regression theorem? Mises, whatever.
Yeah,
Mises. Because of the equilibrium force, we could utilize the money regression theorem to say here's how something that gets bartered eventually turns into money, which is supposedly how gold and silver became money. Well, it turns out none of that's true. None of that holds up to any evidence whatsoever. And we're going to see this as we start poking into more of the specifics of what I've noticed that Javier is suggesting. Stuff like, okay, we need to peg, get rid of the central bank. We need to peg our currency to the dollar, and then we got to get rid of all these federal agencies, like we mentioned. We'll get into more of why that will have such a big effect. And it's all based on this idea of, okay, there might be a little bit of pain up front as, they say, like when a drug addict comes off, they go through withdrawals, but at some point there's going to be this equilibrium and it's going to be better because we've removed the state actors that screw everything up and got them out of the way of the free market, and now the free market can start to solve its own problems.
Because of the central banks or the bank's manipulation of the interest rate down, that creates malinvestment, and people tend to prefer more risky and more long-term investments over short-term investments, and reversing that realigns the economy towards equilibrium. That is basically the Austrian theory. And that's the thinking that this guy operates on, basically.
Well, and an important point that I want to mention about the interest rates, just as a reiteration for someone who's new to this. The classical and Austrian understanding of interest rates is when you increase interest rates, you slow down inflation because it makes money more expensive. And when you lower interest rates, you increase inflation because money's cheaper. It turns out the empirical evidence doesn't show that either. It shows the opposite.
Well, Argentina is actually the perfect example for this, right? Because Argentina has interest rates somewhere upwards of 30% or so, and an inflation rate at around the same levels, if not more. So how did that one turn out? So I wonder what he said, because his theory would technically propose that interest rates. Oh, now Siri thought I was talking to her because I said his theory. That the interest rates are too low, it's create all this malinvestment, and the interest rates need to go back up to the market equilibrium level.
Whatever that is.
Nope. The interest rates are already at the sky high levels. So I'm just pulling up interest rates chart. But anyway, what did it say here? 28. Oh yeah, the interest rate is currently at 133% in Argentina, and the inflation is 138%. And this has been an ongoing thing in Argentina, right? This is not necessarily, although to be fair, in like the late 80s, early 90s, it went up to like 1400%. So by that standard, I guess they're doing better now. but they did, after that whole bout of sky-high inflation, they pegged their currency to the US dollar in the 90s, right? And then ended in a depression. And so now he wants to repeat that experiment. He didn't literally say we have to go on the dollar, but he says that he promotes competition in monetary systems, which is fine. I agree with that. And then people are probably going to choose the dollar because it's, a more popular currency.
So
maybe
terrible. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe he has a point about that, but it all ignores the fact as to what it does with the Argentinian budget sovereignty, which the Argentinian people voted for their parliament, their president, to spend money on their behalf and to make decisions on their behalf. That all goes out the window if you peg your currency to the US dollar. You become beholden to U.S. politicians and bankers, essentially, if you do that.
Well, and then they're kind of sort of already pegged just because of the amount of U.S. dollar debt that they have. Now, this is another thing that we've talked about a lot in this show, is we say, when the U.S. is, in quotes, in debt, it's not the same debt as you and I would be in debt, right? Now, when we talk about and the reason for that is because the U.S. creates the currency unit. It doesn't make any sense to say it's in debt in the currency unit that it has the ability to create. That's not the case in Argentina, right? In Argentina, it owes debt in U.S. dollars, and it can't just snap its finger and create U.S. dollars. So the private person understanding of debt does apply to them. And I was reading, people were reporting that Javier is saying do entirely away with the Argentinian peso. Are you saying that he's not saying that?
We'll get to that as we keep reading through this stuff. But what his quote was, he favors a competitive currency system, and people would probably prefer the dollar to the peso in that kind of system. And so,
sure, right now your job is to make the peso more attractive.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And the way that you would do that, from our naive perspective, never having run governments ourselves, but understanding from MMT, is that if he's going to get rid of all these federal agencies and try to curtail government spending, that's fine. Like I said, from a corruption level and from people actually getting what they paid for level, I totally understand that. But there has to be some other way that money gets injected into the system. And yeah, to your point, this whole, let's get the interest rate high in order to combat inflation is literally the opposite of how it works. So technically, just bring the interest rate down to the bottom or near bottom. Forget about it. If you want to get rid of all these federal agencies, fine, but make sure that there's a way for money to continue to enter the system so you can start controlling your own country with the currency that it creates by itself instead of being at the whim of the United States. Because as we know, now you've pegged to the U.S. dollar. Everybody's using U.S. dollars in your country. You have all this debt in U.S. dollars. What if Javier does something that the United States doesn't like, and the United States says, "Oh, we're just going to sanction you on those dollars"?
Right, and exactly. And what's being ignored is that this foreign indebtedness is the prime cause of hyperinflation in Argentina and in any other country that is struggling. In many other cases where countries have struggled with hyperinflation, such as we had Weimar Germany, we had Zimbabwe, we had maybe Venezuela to some extent. It always came with very large foreign indebtedness, and that problem is not being addressed when you go on the U.S. dollar. Your country will start borrowing a foreign currency that it cannot create. And that, if anything, is people always think, and that creates fiscal responsibility because now they can't borrow endlessly and they have this check and balance and these limits on their spending. But miraculously, it always somehow turns out that the opposite happens when you do that. You get hyperinflation exactly when you put your country in very large foreign debt. Now, I just pulled up this chart here. Argentina's foreign debt is now at, I don't have the most recent, but I think this one here is from 2021, I guess, is at 30% of GDP, which is significant. It was 45% even in 2020.
During COVID.
Yes. And
I bet they got a bunch of COVID money. And people were staying home from work or whatever. So that COVID number might be an outlier.
Sure. But I mean, it's more like they're kind of almost going back to pre-2000 levels. I can't see the chart here, but I know they were pretty hugely in debt back then as well. So that is a problem that is foundational to the hyperinflation that Argentinians have been dealing with for a long time now. I mean, this has been an ongoing issue in Argentina. I remember when Bitcoin first came out and became popular in 2012, 2013, a lot of people started talking about Argentina and how they can protect themselves from hyperinflation by buying Bitcoin and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So yes, this has been an ongoing structural, fundamental problem in Argentina that is largely caused by this foreign indebtedness.
Well, and then let's briefly go over why that's the case, because typically the explanation for hyperinflation is that government just kept printing too much money. Man, everything done hyperinflated, right? And as you pointed out, I mean, let's look at Weimar Germany. And then I would be curious about this as well. So there's foreign indebtedness, and there's also a loss in productive capacity, a significant loss in productive capacity. I'm not sure what's going on in Argentina on that level, but in Weimar Germany, this is post World War I Germany, and part of it. Part of the reparations that were demanded from Germany were payments in gold. And in turn, this is analogous to Argentina due to the fact that Germany can't print gold out of its printers any more than Argentina can print dollars out of its printers, right? So at one point, Germany falls behind on its debt payments, and France literally marches soldiers across the border and takes over coal mining operations over at gunpoint, and then takes the coal from Germany and into France. And obviously, you've got this massive loss in productive capacity. So the amount of things that you have to spend the money on drops significantly. And now, in order to pay that gold, if there isn't enough productive capacity to make the gold that way, we for example, make coal, we sell it to the United States, we got dollars, we can turn around and use those dollars to buy gold, or we sell it to the United States for gold or something like that. They have to just go to the open market and say, okay, let's print a bunch of Deutschmarks and sell them on the open market to buy gold. Well, if you're going to the open market, I mean, if you've ever watched, like, the push-pull of a stock or a cryptocurrency, where you're like, okay, if I want to go in and buy, well, you're going to eat up all those sell prices, and that's going to drive the price up, right? Or if you're going to sell, you're going to eat up all those buy prices, and that's going to drive the price down. So, of course, if they go on the open market and they just print a bunch of marks and they're not being used for anything productive in order to buy gold to make this debt payment, that obviously you're going to get a inflationary, hyperinflationary situation, where I wonder if that's a similar situation here in Argentina, where they say, okay, we got to pay this debt back in dollars, United States dollars. Hey, do we have enough dollars? No. Shit, where do we get them from? Well, we go on the open market and buy them. Well, how do we do that? Oh, we'll just print some pesos. Same situation.
Yeah, in reality, also what this looks like in countries that have large foreign indebtedness, same thing happened in Hungary, Ukraine, I think in Russia as well at one point, is that people borrow money from their... So people go to their bank, they borrow dollars, or the bank borrows... So they borrow dollars, and then they exchange them into their own currency, right? So at that moment, they're buying their own currency with the dollar, and then they do their thing in their own economy, investments, etc. And as we know from economists like Minsky, the banking system has a tendency to move from a hedged position to speculative to Ponzi position over the course of the business cycle. And when you're in the Ponzi phase, your businesses start failing, right? So you start having bankruptcies, failures. Now people need to repay loans. They have to find the dollars to repay the loans that they've made, or the banks start coming collecting those dollars. And there's a scarcity of dollars because they can't make them in their own country. They can't loan them into existence. They can't have any emergency programs in their own. They can't come up with any solutions on their own. They depend on US dollars that they don't have. And now that the dollar, and now that their businesses have failed, they're out of their own money. They have to start looking for dollars to pay the loans back. So they'll start buying dollars as much as they can, as quickly as they can, as long as there are still dollars available to repay their loans, to stay out of bankruptcy, or to, restructure a loan or whatever. They have to repay the loans in dollars. But when they buy up the dollars with all the Argentinian currency that has been created, the value of the foreign exchange value of their own currency drops. And with that, the prices of imports go up. And that is what causes hyperinflation. If your prices for basic resources go up, that is, inavailability of factors of production. That is what causes hyperinflation. Just as if the French troops march into your coal mining territories and extract all the coal that's then not available to your people anymore.
Coal just went up, right? At that point.
In that same sense, when your foreign exchange value drops, all those goods and services from abroad become more expensive, and if you depend on those, then that will be reflected in the prices of your goods and services. And then, congratulations, now you have hyperinflation.
So, what we're getting at here is that we like the idea of small government and getting rid of corruption and getting rid of these federal agencies and stuff. But this is kind of a warning. I don't know if Javier would ever hear something like this, but this is kind of a warning to say that we're telling you, if you go about it in the way that you're suggesting, it's going to be bad.
Yeah,
it's going to be really bad.
Let's start with what he is actually suggesting, okay, and then criticize it. So, economic system. He promotes capitalism, strongly opposes communism, socialism. In a TEDx presentation that went viral, he presented what he described as a love story about capitalism, blah, blah, blah. These are all just pretty common libertarian Austrian talking points. The Nordic countries aren't really socialist, they're actually very free market. He has a point there, I think. Milei has proposed a radical restructuring of the Argentine government, advocating for a reduction in the number of ministries from 24 to 8. Notably, has called for the elimination or merging of major ministries such as education, development, Ministry of Health. And then this video where he physically removes cards. I was trying to find that video. I couldn't find it for the life of me. I don't know why.
I thought I sent it to you this morning.
You probably did. I put it in. Yeah, it's of course the Financial Times is paywall.
So the state is the problem. If you look here, I'll just read what he's saying. There is a great violation, and that is the state. The giant operation and source of Argentine decadence, which is the state. This is the picture of all the state that we have today. If we move towards that board, Ministry of Tourism and Sports, out. Ministry of Culture, out. He's ripping them off the board. Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. Yeah, get rid of that one. Out. I like that. Ministry of Women and Gender Diversity. Out. Great. Ministry of Public Works. Out. I'm not sure about that one. Even if you resist. Let's continue here. Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation. Out. Ministry of Labor, Employment, and Social Security. Out. I don't know about that one. Ministry of Education. Indoctrination, out. I like that one. Ministry of Transportation, out. That was probably okay. Ministry of Health, out. That one's probably okay. Ministry of Social Development, out. That's probably okay. What is left of the state? Ministry of Human Capital, Ministry of Infrastructure, Ministry of Economy and Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Security, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of the Interior. So those are the things he wants to keep.
It's a very showmanship kind of stunt, right? But yeah, it is entertaining nonetheless.
But like I said, I like the idea of getting rid of those things. I mean, especially the sustainable development and the gender diversity crap. Yeah, like please cut that stuff out. But are there certain fundamental services that are being provided by some of these industries that again are part of the way that money is injected into the system to make the economy function? Not that it's functioning that great right now, but to make the economy function at all. And instead of because the feeling I'm getting from him, and you said, well, let's read his policy and actually criticize it, we'll get there, but the feeling I'm getting from him again is, let's remove this stuff, take a step back, lean a little heavier on the dollar, and let the equilibrium work itself out through the free market, is the feeling I'm getting from him. So let's read through.
Because he believes, I'm pretty sure, in this crowding out effect that the state caused. So the state spends money, it goes in debt, and it crowds out the private sector from doing all these things, right? And we've discussed before that there's no evidence for that kind of thing. Expanding the deficit provides more money to the private sector, actually. So what he's doing is kind of the opposite there, right? He's going to be shrinking private sector wealth at the end of the day, but we'll get there.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, this is just cutting spending. That's not really all that exciting. Central bank. Okay, so the central bank is evil, of course, because it creates all the money, right? So it's an easy thing to explain to people, I guess. Even though, as we've stated before, as we've discussed on this show before also, the central bank is more like a clearing mechanism. But then to the extent that the central bank meddles in interest rate policy, yeah, I do agree that they can cause some disruption if they go, to crazy levels, which in Argentina, they have like 128, 130% interest rate, okay? And the inflation is at around the same level as we just showed you earlier, right? Mm-hmm. So this whole theory of raising interest rates is battling inflation. How is that working out? At one point, you have to be empirical and look at the data, look at the numbers. Now, here's an important one, taxation. He articulates a critical view of the role of the state in economic matters, calling it the greatest enemy of wealth. He asserts that an enlarged state funded by taxes can result in reduced real wages. When financed by debt, Milei argues that this essentially constitutes deferred taxation, which is not true. The government doesn't have to pay interest on its debt, doesn't have to repay its debt by collecting money from anyone.
Well, and let's be clear here. If he's talking about U.S. dollars, he is true. He is right.
Yes, true.
If he's talking about Argentinian pesos, he's not.
Right. And to some extent, I guess currently they're not on a dollar standard, I guess. So he's probably talking about the peso budget. Mm-hmm. But if he said, I don't know about the tax situation in Argentina. He says Milei describes Argentina as a tax hell, emphasizes the role of the state as hindrance to economic freedom, saying the state is the problem. Okay, again, blah, blah, blah. Sure. So that is a much more critical aspect. So instead of harping on eliminating all these federal agencies, if you want to institute Austrian economic policies or libertarian economic policy, you have to cut the taxes before you do anything. You have to cut the taxes big time, and then you can start eliminating agencies. Right?
And that's the easiest thing too, right? Cutting the taxes.
And that's countered the neoclassical view, which says we have to cut all this spending and then we can cut your taxes, right? Because cut the spending, then we can afford the tax cuts, right? Mm-hmm. But that's because of the barter theory of money, of the belief that all the money has to be collected in taxes from the government and then it's spent by the government after collecting. And empirically, that's just not how it works. The government spends money into existence to start with, as a deficit and then collect some of that in taxes. And if you understand what I just said there, then you understand why it makes sense that if you want to shrink the state, you have to cut the taxes.
Well, and then I just want to emphasize the empirical evidence here. When we talked to Warren Mosler, he's a guy who came up with the theory of MMT, right? And he used to work as like a trader interacting with the Federal Reserve. And there was a day that he found out, he's like, wait a minute, the reserves get injected into the system before the taxes drain them out. Like he's watching the money move, and he saw that the money gets spent first and taxed after the fact.
Exactly. And so now let's just get to, this is an interesting one. Privatization. Milei supports privatizing state-owned enterprises, including shale driller YPF. Just, sidebar here. We were just talking about it the other day, right? Mm-hmm. What does Argentina have going for it? And Peter Zehan mentioned in his book that there's only a few countries in the world that can do shale drilling efficiently and on a large scale. And he brought up Argentina, and we thought back then when we read through, it was like, whoa, that came kind of out of left field. So it's interesting. They have a state shale driller, YPF. Well, I think that would be a great thing to do.
If it's done right. If it's done right, and not what happened in Russia. Right? Because if okay, we sell this thing, it gets bought up for pennies on the dollar, you get these massively rich new oligarchs that now control the entire shale industry in the country of Argentina, where you just basically move the government of shale out of the actual government's hand and into this oligarchy. I mean, if like, make sure it gets done in a way where you actually have that spirit of competition and right, you don't end up with just a different form of government.
Absolutely. Let's just scrap soy taxes. So I don't know what's going on there.
I wanted to address something in taxation up earlier. I forgot. So when he says he asserts that an enlarged state funded by taxes. No, wait, where's the part? He says something to the effect that taxation is getting in the way of everything, and I can see that too. If you want to start a business and you have 14 different agencies that want to take taxes from you, I mean, A, there's the problem of actually paying those taxes and what it does to your business, and B, like just keeping track of it all sometimes could just be this horrible, hellacious headache, right? I mean, I'm going through that right now, just trying to, for my company with payroll taxes. It's like just getting the fucking number right is a pain in the ass.
Yeah, and you live in the U.S., right, which still is pretty good in terms of doing business, in comparison to the world. So just imagine what it's like in other countries.
Right, when you have a corrupt country according to the corruption index. Right.
Yeah, with these things, I never know who to believe or what to believe.
Sure.
Right.
Well, I guess the question is, if I have a contract, if I have a contract in Argentina, I don't know the answer to this, and I have a contract with you, you don't uphold your end of the contract, can I enforce that contract? I think that really tells how well you can do business in Argentina, but go ahead, sorry.
Right. Okay, so he pledged to scrap soy taxes, I think that's a good idea. Maybe it reduces the number of soy boys in your country. And ditch electric vehicle battery bid as part of this deregulation program. Yeah, good.
Yeah, that's the problem there.
That's the thing you'll see right there. This whole EV stuff and climate hysteria, that is silly, so that's good that he's going up against it. He also articulated his intention to either shut down, privatize, or redefine the National Scientific and Technical Research Council. I don't know anything about that, so...
yeah, my only guess could be, is it corrupt like I just suggested? If it is, get rid of it. If it's not, I don't know. Yeah.
Social Security. Milei described the addendum to Article 14 of the Argentine Constitution, which guarantees labor rights, pensions, and the entire social security system as the country's cancer. He pledged to repeal it as president. Okay, so just saying, if you repeal that, you realize that there is a massive number of people who will immediately feel the effects of your specific policies. It's not some esoteric, down the road kind of thing. It's literally, there's going to be people who absolutely hate your guts for the life of them.
Yeah, I can eat today, but I can't eat tomorrow because you just did that.
So again, this is if all the state spending is eliminated, you have to cut the taxes for. You have to cut the tax to such a low level that there's money just sloshing around like crazy, so that this kind of stuff can be replaced.
And then I want to address the specifics of this, because we're kind of playing this game of, okay, there's state spending. What are you spending it on? Because that's an important question. For this here, Social Security in particular, that's money that hits the bottom part of the population. This isn't the Ministry of Gender Diversity and Inclusion, where someone gets this massive government contract and doesn't do anything. Gets paid $100 million to make sure that there's trans studies in university. And then it's just money that's going nowhere, right? And yes, it makes its way into the economy, but is it hitting like the bottom rung of the population? Maybe, maybe not. The Social Security hits the bottom rung of the population and works its way up. So I would not get rid of that at all.
Well, it definitely eliminates a lot of consumption, which means it eliminates a lot of sales for a lot of businesses, which means it cripples your economy, which means it cripples your GDP, which means people get laid off, which means people have less money, which means blah, blah, blah. I mean, all seen this deflationary spiral over and over. So just saying, if you want to do that, you have to cut the taxes to a level where there's just crazy money sloshing around to replace that kind of. So and this is why I'm not necessarily always saying I'm against these things. Just saying you have to do it the right way. And if you don't, then you will make libertarianism, Austrian economics, the whole revolt against the globalist establishment, you give that a very bad name. And in plain sight, very obviously and very easy to sense and notice and felt directly in the pockets and the bellies of the population.
Although, to that point, I don't think he's going to be able to repeal that. I don't think the president of any country can just change the Constitution.
Of course. That's the thing, right? So that's a whole other question. We're just like talking crap right now about his positions and whether he can actually implement. So then there's some other pretty cool things here. Of course, all the social views. Okay, abortion and euthanasia. He opposes abortion, euthanasia, grounding his views in libertarian principles such as non-aggression, which is interesting because Murray Rothbard also grounded his pro-choice stance in the non-aggression principle. So you see, you can twist these views kind of to fit your ideology almost, oftentimes. But yeah, he says he considers abortion a violation of property rights, equates it with theft. I mean, I don't know why it's theft. Why isn't it murder?
Everything's theft. Everything evil is theft in libertarianism. It's some form of theft, yeah.
Right. But why isn't it just murder? I mean, that's even more. Okay, so he's basically against abortion. LGBT rights and marriage. Yeah. He LGBT rights and marriage, I absolutely agree with him. Milei is indifferent to same-sex marriage. He sees marriage as a contract and is opposed to it as an institution. He has also stated that homosexuality is a personal choice and is not a disease, stating that he would respect any type of consensual sex, including sex with an elephant.
Yeah, but I'm not with him on that one.
No, I just think it's funny that he equates all this stuff to sex with an elephant. On the topic of transgender rights, Milei stated he does not care about gender identification as long as you do not make me pay the bill, and compared it to identifying as a cougar. In reference to public funding for gender-affirming care and public education, he said, I have no problem, but don't impose them. I mean, totally reasonable views, right? Do all your things, cut your wheelies off and your tatas and whatnot. Just don't make me pay for it, right? Is that too much to ask for? Education, Milei supports school choice, voucher system, so that's great.
Yep.
He wants a private healthcare privatize public healthcare providers. He supports legalizing the organ trade. I'm pretty sure he got that from reading Murray Rothbard, because that's what he argues to. And here's a big one. Milei opposes mandatory vaccination.
Great. Winner.
I mean, it just keeps going. He's, drugs and prostitution. He supports drug legalization within the context of a free society. He's cautioned, if you want to commit suicide, I don't have any problem. Drugging is committing suicide gradually. I would, if you want to get high, do whatever you want, but don't ask me to pay the bill. I mean, I'm okay with that stance, kind of. I'm not saying it's good to be a druggie and all that. Prostitution is nothing wrong with paying for sex, considering a free transaction. Gun laws. Okay, supporter of law. Milei endorses the unrestricted ownership of firearms, saying that Argentina needs forces to have authority, and gun laws in Argentina are restrictive. Immigration. He wants to restrict immigration. Said that he would prohibit the entry into the country of migrants with a criminal record, and said that he wanted to expel those who committed crimes. I mean, that's pretty.
That's what a normal country should say. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be pretty normal until 2016, I guess.
And he also wants to restrict free education and universal health care to foreign nationals. What a crazy idea.
Yeah. Yes. Just don't make the people pay for those things. Foreign relations. So this is a pretty bad one. In a July 2023 interview with the Financial Times, Milei said that if he is elected president, he would overshoot all the targets in the IMF deal, calling the required spending cuts as small compared with what he says the country needs.
Now, we talked about this, about the IMF, is that the IMF appears more or less to be a Team Illuminati overlord tool that forces austerity on countries by getting them into debt for typically no good reason. And if he's wanting to shoot if he's saying the IMF isn't doing well enough.
Well, yeah, the IMF is essentially the global bankers' socialized collection agency, right? The global bankers gamble in third world country bonds, and when the third world countries can't repay the bonds, the IMF comes in and makes sure that they pay by imposing, spending cuts, tax increases, bail-ins like they did in Cyprus. All the stuff they've done all over the world. I think in Africa they've done a lot of damage too. That's what they are. They're the global bankers. They don't have to pay for this collection agency, right? The taxpayer pays because we love to help our global banking overlords.
Right.
So that's why they really need a socialized, huge, ginormous collection agency with political connections, banking connections, everything you need to change the opinions of foreign leaders, depose foreign leaders, get involved in their budgeting process, all this stuff. So this makes him sound a bit like an American shill almost, right? Or like a globalist shill. And that's why, some people criticize him as a WEF shill.
But I want to address whether or not he's WEF shill there. I get the feeling from what we've read so far is he's not saying this because he wants to benefit the IMF. He just sees, he's so strongly libertarian and so strongly don't want to remove federal government. He's looking at the IMF going, wait to see what I want to do, man.
Right. Yeah. But to be fair, I mean, anyone like the IMF themselves or anyone who promotes austerity in a country, they always do it with the rhetoric of, well, this is just the right thing to do. You've gone too crazy on your spending, so you have to cut all the public services, all the public spending, raise your taxes because you've lived beyond your means. That's always their talking point. It's always framed as the right.
Yes.
It's always framed as the right thing to do, and there has to be a little pain, but then that'll fix everything, and then everything will be great. Well, how has that turned out in the past? So the other stuff is not really all that interesting. There's some foreign relations stuff, right? He supports the Ukraine war, which is pretty lame. He wants to freeze relations with China.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, the Falkland Islands, he kind of admits defeat to the United Kingdom, but he wants to get them back. But keep
talking. I've got some kids that showed up. I guess I'll be delivered my lunch. Stand by.
Okay. All right.
I'm coming.
Falkland Islands, he recognizes that the UK kicked their asses back in 70s, when Maggie took a cruiser, as Roger Waters says in his song. So that is the positions of his. So now if we want to get a little more into the economic risk of his proposal. Basically, cutting public spending and potentially, I don't know if he says Argentina is a tax hell, but I hope that he doesn't want to raise taxes, but rather cut them. And he would have to, or the legislators of the country, I'm guessing, would have to cut the taxes drastically. If just a portion of the spending cuts that he's promoting are going to actually materialize, then taxes have to be cut even more so in order to make up for it. And that's usually not what happens, unfortunately, when austerity is imposed on a country. Usually the public spending gets cut big time and taxes are raised, actually. But even if the public spending is cut and the taxes are kept at the same level, then that will, at some point, not too far distant future, actually a lot of people will feel the pain very quickly, and it could cause a depression. I mean, literally a depression like they had in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that's the kind of, to me, that's the biggest risk I see with theoretically what he wants to do. And also trying to understand the big context of why was he allowed to become president of Argentina, right? What is the game plan here? Is it some kind of trap that's being set for the right, for libertarians, for the anti-globalist movement in general? That is a big possibility. I mean, they kind of did that with Trump and the January 6th PSYOP and all that stuff. And now they're already framing this guy as the Argentina's Trump moment. So one can only hope that there's a different approach that can be taken in that situation for someone like him. There's an approach where you don't step into that booby trap, basically.
I'm back.
We have done back. Okay, so yeah, I mean, the other stuff down here I was saying is kind of, so it's just kind of blasé, so we can talk a little bit more about the economics of the whole thing.
Yeah, well, and then just to like the overview of his positions on everything else except the economics. I mean, it's like, yes, really like that, or really kind of like that. I mean, that's the same with any politician, right? Or anybody you ever talk to. You're like, I agree with you on those things, but I don't agree with you on these other things. But on the economics, regardless of what he wants to do on everything else, if he screws up the economics, he's not going to be able to get any of it else done.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's going to be protests in the streets. There's going to be starving grandma and starving poor children. And it's going to be all over the globalist media. And there's going to be protests, probably violent. Although I've heard from a friend of mine who's Argentinian that Argentinians are not a very violent people. They don't have a lot of that kind of stuff.
Sorry, real quick, can you turn your screen share off if we're gonna just go back to chatting. There we go. Okay, go for it.
That they're not very violent people, so she's not worried about a revolution kind of situation. But who knows? I mean, Antifa terrorists can be activated and deployed anywhere, it seems, right? Not necessarily from within the country, but from without, rather. And so there's going to be violent protests, potentially, if some of these unpopular programs go into place. And then these violent protesters are going to do really nasty things that the state will have to fight back against and start repelling and maybe start shooting people. And then that
show
will
up
be
on Twitter. Yeah,
that's going to be on the media. The new dictator of Argentina, all that kind of stuff. That's what I absolutely don't want to see. And so that's kind of what
Yeah,
I would hope.
we want you to be successful, Javier.
Yeah.
We want you to be successful, and we're legitimately worried you're not going to be because of these economic reforms you're proposing. And then it's going to make all the rest of us look bad because now you're going to be this prime example of why everybody who would even question a Team Illuminati overlord just has no idea what they're talking about, and they're just going to destroy everything.
Yeah. Yeah, what should be done, right? So I think it would be good to just make the positive case
That's a good point.
Based on what we have gathered so far, because neither of us are experts in Argentina or Latin America or anything. But based on what we've gathered, we have a country with a very high inflation. I don't know exactly how well their economy is doing in terms of per capita income. Honestly, that's something we should probably look up right now.
I think it might be worth bringing up the population demographic chart while we're at it.
Right. Bring it up. Well, I'll look it up.
Well, I sent it to you. What happens if I share the screen? Oh, no. Okay.
So they have a GDP per capita of $13,000, so it's not necessarily stellar, but it has been growing at least, long term, you could say. So anyway, it's not great, right? So these people are not necessarily doing great. Okay, so so you were able to put the demography there.
So this is an important point that I've learned after listening to Peter Zeihan, is if you look at this graph right here, this shows Argentina's current demographic distribution. And
it looks good, I guess.
This looks healthy. Like in a lot of countries, something like Germany or Japan or especially China, you see this big bulge here for the boomer population, and then it immediately shrinks.
Yeah, show an example of what you don't want. Argentina.
I'm gonna look at Japan. No, let's do Germany. Germany demographic chart. Do I need to select a different screen here?
No, it's pulling up.
There we go.
Statistisches Bundesamt.
Here. So this is what the German graph looks like, where you see this big bulge in the boomers, and then I think a little bulge here in the millennials, and then we really see it petering down. And what this means is as more and more people enter into retirement from this big bulge, you have fewer and fewer people contributing to the economy. I mean, forget finances for a second. I'm just talking about like actual goods and services. Fewer and fewer people delivering goods and services, and more people needing them. And then once they die off, there's nothing to replace it. So you have this entire infrastructure built out for this population at such a level, and then suddenly, 20%, 30% of it's gone? How does it handle that? Yeah.
How societies die out long term. Civilizations die out long term.
Right. But going back to Argentina, we're not seeing that. This is a little more healthy, where there is a replacement population.
Yes. So we can see that Argentinians are reproducing okay, and the demographic chart looks healthy. So we have a positive situation there. The country has good oil resources apparently, and massive potential to do more shale drilling apparently. That's from Peter Zeihan's book, The End of the World is Just the Beginning, which we've discussed on 3 episodes, or several episodes actually, so you can go back to that. But what is plaguing the country is this sky-high inflation and 130% or so. And that you can only address by regaining your own budget sovereignty.
Right.
And that means, because why are people borrowing in the private why are people borrowing money from abroad, it's because they're short money in domestic currency. So this is always the cycle that we've seen historically. We've discussed it before too. Even in the US, you can see this. Whenever you have austerity kicking in, which means basically a low or negative growth of net private savings, that means that people borrow the money from the banks. And in a country such as Argentina, where the currency itself is not very good and it's high inflation, so people borrow foreign money, borrow US dollars. So what would help Argentina is to, I would say, like I've said before, really look at cutting taxes and maybe look into a job guarantee or a transition job program, and then think about eliminating all these ridiculous agencies, gender inclusion.
And then don't forget dropping the interest rates.
What was it?
Don't forget dropping interest rates.
Drop the interest rates to 0 or 0.25%, or a low amount, 1%, whatever, some kind of amount. It's a political choice. It's not a choice that you make out of economic necessity, basically, your interest rate. It's kind of like a question of, hey, do we want to offer our population free money if they've saved up some money? It's really as stupidly simple as that. We have that here. I like having the honesty, right? But what I like doesn't mean it makes it right. I have 30-year treasury bonds that pay me guaranteed 5% per year for 30 years. I like that. That's a good. That's
good for you. It's good for Nima. Yeah.
Good thing to have, but is it the right thing? Is it the right thing to give rich people more money? I don't know. I don't think so necessarily. I don't think we need it necessarily. So I would say, yeah, definitely look into cutting the interest rate.
And I wonder, based on what you just said, the people don't want to borrow in the local currency. Well, if interest rates are 130%, would you?
Right.
What business owner is going to be like, I'm going to start a coffee shop, so I'm going to go to the bank and get myself a 10-year, 130% loan. I mean, that's just asinine.
Right. I mean, it's a whole that is an inflation country, right? But at the same time, if you borrow money, you put that money in a car or a washing machine. The washing machine will go up in value, and you'll be able to repay your money. But then that's the thing. Is you always have the inflation. You always see this phenomenon where inflation goes up, and then the central bank adjusts the interest rate accordingly. And because they claim they're fighting inflation, I think it's really just to make sure that those with money, the oligarchs, the rich, that their wealth in that currency is preserved. Because that's the net effect of interest rate policy at the end of the day. It's not banking policy. It's not lending. It had nothing to do with that. It's just giving people. It's a basic income for the rich. At the end of the day, it's like we've done shows where we go into this in more detail, but in the most simple terms, it's a basic income for the rich that the government has decided that they want to pay out. Now, when I say rich, not necessarily, anyone can buy these assets, right?
Right, but I mean, you got to have a certain amount before it becomes significant, right?
Right.
5% on $100 isn't going to get you anything.
Right.
5% of $100,000 isn't going to get you anything. 5% on 10 million, you'll be able to live off of that, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
At the beginning. Yeah. So I was just sort of listing ideas of what should be done.
Well, and then
yeah.
No, I was going to expand on the federal transition job that you mentioned, and implementing that before getting rid of the federal agencies, because you're creating basically the net that's going to catch all the people and money that's no longer going to be available. Yeah,
that would actually, now that you said it, that would be if this is all a trap and a globalist sabotage operation, putting in place a federal transition job program before you start eliminating these agencies. That would solve it all. That would eliminate the trap 100%. Guaranteed. You would not have a recession, a depression, or anything if you have that program in place.
Unfortunately, he would probably just see that as Keynesianism.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Another thing, like that, Austrians are so Keynesianism is so anathema to Austrians, right? It's like it's like the cross to a vampire or something. They just hear that word and it's already. They're not going to engage in it, and that's unfortunate because Keynes had some interesting observation. And also, by the way, when Austrians say Keynesianism, oftentimes they don't actually mean stuff that Keynes said. They mean stuff that people came after Keynes said. Mm-hmm. Keynes made some good, basically MMT, a large part of MMT is based on Keynesian observations, namely...
now the Austrians won't listen to us anymore. Sorry. Right.
But the concept of liquidity preference of the private sector, there's a certain propensity on the part of the private sector to save. And that has to be taken into consideration alongside everything else that you do in economics, right? As opposed to, I'm going to cut all these federal agencies, and then the private sector will step in and make up for the. But with what money are they going to step in? Right. So the thing is, the eliminating these agencies will necessarily withdraw money from the economy. And that needs to be replaced somehow. So that is not. So if you don't care about the fact that liquidity preference is a thing, then you don't recognize that all the consequence. You cut all this spending. Now there's a certain cadre of people that have less money, and you're like, okay, well, deserve because they shouldn't be getting this free money. Okay, but should or shouldn't doesn't matter. They have less money. Disposal to spend, so now they're going to be going crazy over finding as much money to stash away as possible. They're not going to spend. The corporations are not going to make money. They're not going to be employing people, and you get into this whole recessionary, deflationary spiral that the Austrians just say, no, that's good because deflation is good, right? Because as Tom Woods has said, well, if a pair of jeans costs $10 instead of $20, isn't that a great thing? Well, yeah, if that is the only thing you're looking at, then yeah, that's a great thing. But the economy, society, civilization is a system with parts that are intermingled and connected.
Right. Well, if it destroys the company that makes jeans, then you can't buy jeans for any amount of dollars.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, there was a point that I wanted to jump off from that is the equilibrium and the barter theory of money. It comes back to that again, is the Austrians say, well, just take all this stuff out. Everything's going to deflate and it's going to be really painful. But once it deflates back to equilibrium, things will balance themselves out and we'll have the proper valuation of money.
Yeah. And you notice in all what you just said there's no actual evidence or observation of this. It's all metaphors. It's like, we rip off the Band-Aid and it's going to hurt for a little bit, but then it's going to be better. Right.
We're going to stop taking the drug. We'll go through withdrawals and then we'll be better at the end. What is better? Yeah. What is the number? What does it look like? Yeah. What is the evidence that this has ever occurred?
Right.
And if there's no such thing as a barter theory, or I mean, there is such thing as the theory of barter theory of money, but if the barter theory of money is wrong and there is no equilibrium in the economy, then what you're proposing can't even work in theory. And we're saying that the barter theory of money is wrong and there is no equilibrium in the economy. So we're saying that doesn't even work.
There's actually a thought that I wanted to bring up on all this, right? So we have this new system emerging of decentralization, decentralized cryptocurrency, etc. I think that is a monetary system that is well suited to the sort of Austrian and Capistan dream world kind of scenario. So maybe the way to get to Ancapistan is not to cause massive austerity and collapse and disaster, but rather to keep this system going as people trickle into the decentralized economy over time. Mm-hmm. Just saying. Seems to me to be, because that's actually what's happening already, right? Seems to be an approach that would work better to achieve those ends than to cut the budget, do IMF austerity. Because guess what? If you do that, people won't have time to deal with cryptocurrency. You know, you're not going to get to Ancapistan if you cause a depression. You're going to get to Fascistan or
Comistan.
social.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
more likely Comistan, because if you take away the Social Security and all the public spending, and everyone's going to go like, I need a bread line.
Yeah. And by the way, another thing I just saw, Argentina recorded a current account deficit of $6.4 billion in June 2023. So, and that's just a quarter, I guess. So Argentina has a pretty sizable current account deficit. They don't have an export surplus. So that's yet another reason as to why any attempts to balance their budget will be an absolute disaster. I have very little doubt about that. They need a deficit just to stay afloat, and then they need more than that in order to create a large and healthy private sector.
Re-emphasizing that. The state creates the money for the private sector to use. And if the state doesn't create that money for the private sector to use, the private sector starves. So as Nima said earlier, just because you get the public sector out of the way, if you don't provide the liquidity to the private sector, they're not going to be able to do anything. The barter theory of money and the equilibrium of the free market is not going to come in to save you.
Exactamundo, as they would say in Argentina. Just kidding. Yeah, this is just a quick chart of Argentina's current account situation. But that basically means export surplus versus deficit. So pretty recently, their current account deficit has grown more and more. And I mean, another thing that would help certainly is to, other than growth policies and deficit spending, may well be to absolutely supercharge the shale oil industry by privatizing the hell out of it, because that can bring up their current account deficit. And I'm not necessarily, current account deficit is not bad necessarily in isolation, but if you want to have a balanced budget, this is why in Germany, they were able to have a balanced budget for a long time. I think that has come to an end with, ridiculousness of the last few years, and then the Russia war and all the stupid ass decisions that they made to cripple their own economy. Up until then, they were actually able to sustain a pretty balanced budget in Germany for a long time. So that's just an important factor to consider. The zero line is here, right? So for a long time, they've remained below this line, and they are pretty far down here right now.
And now this is our trade surplus / deficit, right?
Correct.
And then so if we're below the line, that means money is coming in and goods are going out, or vice versa?
Vice versa. So goods are coming in, money is coming out.
Okay. So they okay, to your point, they've got, on top of cutting spending, if you're going to do that when you already have money going out from a trade deficit, you're really asking for trouble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's also what caused all the trouble in Europe in the 2010s, the Greek crisis, the Greek depression. It was all the import surplus countries that suffered the most from the IMF restrictions that ended up getting imposed, I think, on Greece. I think IMF got involved in Greece, or whoever got involved, but certainly I think Cyprus as well. Mm-hmm. And then there was also Portugal was struggling. I think Spain maybe to some extent. Ireland, I don't know, maybe too. But a lot of the import countries were hit hard by this requirement to balance the budget, whereas countries like Germany, who are export surplus, they were just saying, well, look, we can do it. I mean,
what's
look
your
at
problem?
you.
Yeah.
You primitive, stupid Southern people down there spending excessively beyond your means. Well, it wasn't, it wasn't like that. It was just Germany has a chronic current account surplus. They froze in that whole thing in time when they fixed the European currencies, and so they've always benefited from that whole situation in that sense, because the foreign exchange couldn't facilitate an adjustment in the trade in between these countries and Europe. And then came the austerity, right? Then came the budget cuts, and that caused a depression in Greece.
And that's what we're possibly looking at here in Argentina.
It's possible, but yeah, so we'll have to see how much of these things can actually get pushed through. But even if the tendency is in that direction, then that's not going to fix any of their problems. Mm-hmm. Probably just exacerbate them.
So, Neba, we've been going here, getting close to about an hour and a half. I think we've covered this pretty well. Maybe we should add Javier, if you or any of your people happen to hear this and they speak English, we'll happily come work for you. We do want to see you succeed. We do want to see Argentina get better, but we got some concerns, man.
Yeah, wishing him the best, wishing them all the best, of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been Dylan Moore and Nima Majur of Irita TV. Check out more of our stuff at irita.tv. And you can also check out our Forbidden News aggregator at dissentwatch.com. It's pretty cool. We're on there because we own it. We are forbidden in some areas of the internet. But yeah, irita.tv, dissentwatch.com. Thanks for watching. See you next time.